What are the key elements for success that most venture investors will look for in a business idea? This is my list. Different investors will have different lists, and they might order the list somewhat differently, but I believe that this list mirrors most venture investors' lists, and the items that you see or the elements you see on this list, I believe will be in the vast majority of investor lists, and some investors might have one or some additional items. Some investors might place more or less focus on these elements, but this is, I think, a pretty comprehensive list of the elements that investors look for in successful, scalable business ideas. Now, I'm going to start with the second one on the list, which is innovation. What is innovation? Innovation is something new and useful. So for me, when I listen to an investment pitch, I can tell very quickly whether it's innovative or not. I know it's innovative or not because I just decide very quickly, have I heard this idea before? If I've heard the idea before, it's not new, and therefore it's not innovative to me. So I can make a very fast decision on business ideas that I hear. If it's a repeat of a business idea already heard, it's not innovative, and therefore I'm not interested. That was my first gate, so I'm going to reject. Now, this doesn't mean that it needs to be cold fusion. When I talk about a new idea, it can be new, a new variation of an existing idea, because the vast majority of new business ideas won't be brand new, but they will be variations of existing ideas. So why is innovation so important? Why is innovation at the top of, or one of the top two on my list of key elements for success, for successful scalable businesses? If we look at new product categories, we can divide the entrepreneurs in these product categories into three groups. So a new product category arises. There will be three waves of entrepreneurs that seek to exploit opportunities in this new product category. The first wave will be the innovators. All three of these waves begin with the letter I. So the first wave is the innovators. The second wave are the imitators. So the innovators are early. The imitators are fast followers who copy the innovators. And the third wave, the third I, are the idiots. The idiots are the investors, the entrepreneurs that rush into a product category after all of the excess profits are gone. So as investors, we can choose to invest in which wave of entrepreneurs. We can invest in the innovators, we can invest in the imitators, or we can invest in the idiots. Obviously, we're not going to choose to invest in the idiots. So we must choose between investing in the innovators or investing in the imitators. This choice is not as clear-cut as it might seem at first. Why? Should we invest in innovators or imitators? Which wave will generate more successful companies? In most cases, the imitator wave will generate more successful companies. Why? Because there will be many more imitators than there are innovators in any product category. This has to be true by definition. Why? Because innovators, there'll be only one or a very small number, otherwise they're not innovators anymore. And each of the innovators will be copied many times by imitators. So I think it is fair to say there will be many more successful imitators than innovators. If we're investing in businesses and our goal is to invest in successful businesses, therefore, you might wonder, why would we invest in innovators rather than imitators? The reason is, we're not just looking as venture investors to invest in successful companies. We're looking to invest in successful companies that are able to achieve scale. And if you remember, my definition of achieving scale is companies that can reach enterprise value of $100 million or more within 5 to 10 years. And in that category of successful, scalable companies, the vast majority will be innovators, not imitators. So we will be looking at investing in innovators. Now, why is it that the vast majority of successful, scalable companies are innovators? There are several reasons. One is innovation helps the company to stand out. Two is innovation helps the company to get into the right market at the right time. We'll go through that in more detail when we look at understanding markets for successful, scalable startups. But for now, I think it's enough to say innovative companies get into markets early before the markets reach their exponential growth phase, and it will almost always be an innovator who is the market leader in a new product category during the exponential growth phase, which is what drives our long-term high returns. Innovation also helps startups to compete with established companies. In order to become successfully scalable, startups will need to compete successfully both with other startups and with established companies. And in order to compete successfully with established companies, startups will need to exploit weaknesses in established companies, the most obvious of which is ability to innovate. Successful large companies have much more difficulty innovating and especially dealing with disruptive innovations than do startups, for reasons that we'll talk about in more detail when we get to the sustainable competitive advantage. But for now, it's important to note that innovation helps companies stand out, helps companies get into the right market at the right time, and also helps companies compete with especially large established players, which will help them achieve scalability. So first thing we look at is the product innovative? And also, is the business model innovative? I'll talk about that in more detail when we get to business model. But is the product innovative? If yes, then we're interested to go to the next gate in the decision tree. One important point to note, you see I said product here, not service. So typically, scalable, successful scalable companies are product driven rather than service driven. What does that mean? It means that fundamentally they deliver their value proposition to customers with capital or technology rather than people or labor. We'll talk about that more in detail in a later lesson. So we want a company with an innovative product. The next thing that we look at, so next gate is the value proposition. Does this innovative product solve a painful problem for customers? If we have a company with an innovative product that doesn't solve a painful problem for customers, we call this a solution seeking a problem. And this is not a business we want to invest in. Why? Because customer pain is an extremely important factor in startup company success. How does that work? Let's think about for a minute, what is the most likely reason that a startup is going to fail? The most likely reason that a startup is going to fail is there proves to be insufficient demand for their product. Why would there prove to be insufficient demand for their product? The most likely reason there is insufficient demand for their product is they are not solving a painful enough customer problem. Why is the fact that they're not solving a painful customer problem the most likely reason for insufficient demand? Is that the most powerful driver of demand is pain. Customers seek to solve the problem of pain or address painful problems before they seek to do anything else. So we want companies with innovative products that solve painful customer problems. What is the next factor that we look at in determining whether the company has the potential to scale or not? The next factor that we look at is the market. So if we think about extending the logic from the previous question, what is the most likely reason that the startup company will fail if they have an innovative product that solves a painful problem for customers? The most likely reason is there was sufficient demand from the customer base for this innovative product, but the market was just too small. Or the market was not a market that was conducive to success by a startup company. So the market was wrong. And this is the next factor that we want to look at. Typically, we're going to look at a couple of characteristics of the market to understand whether this company has the potential for success. What are the characteristics that we'll look at? We want to look at how big is the market and how fast is it growing? And is this a market that is conducive to success by a scalable startup? The most important of those factors will be the growth rate of the market. So typically we'll want to see that the startup is targeting a market that is relatively small and well-defined right now, that is amenable to startup companies, and that is growing very fast. Why do we look at the growth rate so closely? Why is this such an important factor in determining the attractiveness of the market? The reason is the company itself needs to grow very fast to achieve scalability. I already set out the parameters for scalability, which is the company is going to go from essentially 0 to 100 million within 5 years. That implies extremely fast growth. And in order for the company to grow, they're going to need to acquire customers. Where are they going to acquire these customers from? There are two sources of customers for startup companies. One is customers who are already in the market but are customers of existing players. And two is customers who are new to the market. Which source of customers is the preferable for startups? The second one, customers who are new to the market. Why? If the startup needs to grow by taking customers away from established competitors, and that's the only source of growth, this means they're going to face very difficult challenges in early days of growing the company, especially if they're entering a slow growth market. Why? In a slow growth market, let's say a market is large and growing slowly. This means there are established players in the market who are dependent for their success on retaining their market share because the market has very little growth. So from day one, the startup will be in a life and death struggle with large competitors in order to generate their growth. In a fast-growing market, many new customers will be entering the market. This is by definition a fast-growing market. And therefore, the startup will be able to fuel their growth mainly with new customers, which will make it much easier for them to grow as fast as they need to. The next factor that we'll look at in determining whether the company can scale successfully is their marketing strategy, meaning how will they price their product, how will they market their product, how will they distribute and sell their product. And we'll look at a couple of factors here. Some of the most important ones are the unit economics of the company's business plan. So can the company actually produce, market, distribute, and sell this product profitably at a unit cost level? So we'll explore that in more detail when we get into marketing strategy. but that's one of the things that we'll look at usually in the first cut of deciding whether a company looks attractive for investment or not. The next factor is the company's sustainable competitive advantage. In order for a startup to scale successfully, they will need to compete when others enter. Others will enter the market opportunity that was identified by a successful scalable startup, and they will do so relatively quickly. So startups will have to compete successfully against two types of players. One, other startups that are following them. Two is established players that decide to challenge them after they have identified a market opportunity. In order to compete with these other players, startups will have two major tools. One is proprietary intellectual property. Two are competitive strategies that enable them to create barriers to entry. We'll look at both of these in more detail later in the course, but at the first cut, we need to see they have some proprietary intellectual property and they have some reasonable strategies for creating barriers to entry for followers. Then we're going to look at the company's financial plan. So what is their business model? What do their financial forecasts look like? How much money do they need to execute their forecasted strategy? What are they going to use this money for? And what valuation are they raising that money? What is their exit strategy? And what type of return might we get from this investment? And then at the bottom of my list, but not the least important item, in fact, the most important item is the team. So we'll look at the team and startup team, and in real life, these teams may be very small at the time we meet the company, but so we focus a lot on the quality of the CEO and top management team. There are two types of startup teams. A team will succeed no matter what, and a B team will screw up the best idea in the world. So we only want to invest in A teams. I like to summarize that by saying if we consider all the items on this list and look at the three most important topics or three most important elements for success, what's number one? Number one is team. What's number two? Number two is team. Number three is also team. So team, team, and team are the most important decision elements in investing in a startup. That probably reminds you of another type of investment where three factors trump all other factors, no pun intended. For example, real estate investment, so location, location, location. How are team in a startup and location in real estate the same? The location of a piece of property is the only thing that can't be changed about that property. So good locations tend to yield good property investments. Good teams tend to yield successful startups. Now, of course, we can change the team in the startup, unlike location, but we don't want to need to change the team. If we need to change the team, something is very wrong with this investment. So at the very least, we expect that this team is the one that's going to make the company successful until the next round of funding. And in the best case, this is the team that's going to take us to exit. So key elements for success: team, team, and team.